Hi, Brittany.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you for letting me come into your classroom and observe. Um, it was a really good experience for me to kind of see a different classroom and a different dynamic. But I came in on January 6th, and I was in there for about 40 minutes. And I just want to kind of share with you the data that I collected and kind of what it looks like here so that you know what it looks like when we go over it and talk about it.
Okay.
But basically, if you remember that when we met before I came in, we talked about what your concerns were with your classes. Particularly, you mentioned your World History Honors class, and you said that you were concerned that maybe there was a little bit more teacher talk than student talk, and that we chose Indicator 15 as our focus to organize students to practice and deepen knowledge.
Okay.
So what I did when I came in is I just focused on one thing, and that was how much teacher talk was there, how much student talk was there, just so that you and I can sit down and kind of look at that so we can gauge if there is more teacher talk, student talk, and where to go from there.
Awesome.
With focusing on that indicator.
Okay.
So the way I collected the data was I made up 4 columns. I kept time here. Teacher talk, I checked off when you were talking. I checked off when students were talking. And then I just made little side notes to kind of keep myself also on track with what was, being said and everything else.
Okay.
So for the first 7 minutes I was in there, basically it was teacher talk. And you were giving instructions. You were asking the students to copy their text and not to talk. And you went into obviously more detail, but that first 7 minutes you were giving instruction and getting them started on their first activity.
Okay.
Okay. So, I'm not sure if you had done this before I walked in, but do you recall having given the students a learning goal?
I don't think I did, no.
Okay. So how do you think that would have worked out had you introduced it with a learning goal?
Yeah, maybe if I had given the learning goal, they kind of would have had a hint that something was going on, that we were doing something that was related to what my objective was for the day.
Because you were like, you're going to copy the book, you're not going to ask questions, you're not going to talk, you're just going to copy the book.
Right.
And so I wasn't sure if they had a background knowing what the purpose of it was or any little bit of a hint of the learning goal or objective to know like why they're doing it. Okay. And then for the next 10 minutes there was no talk. So neither you or the kids were talking.
Right.
Simply because of the purpose of your activity was that there was going to be no talking. So students were copying a text, teacher was walking around checking and monitoring each group. You did have about 7 kids raise their hands and call you over, which I couldn't hear what was being asked, but I'm assuming they were maybe asking questions about the activity.
Yeah, they were just asking, where do we have to start on the page to copy the text? Do we have to write this over here down and all of that? So I was just kind of clarifying for them where they needed to start in the text.
Okay. All right, so you were doing a little bit of clarifying of the instructions when you were going over to these kids.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, and then it kind of got more minimal with the timestamps because we started out with 7 minutes of instruction, 10 minutes of them copying the text, and then it was down to like 1 minute for each of the things that I was seeing between like transitioning from one thing to the other.
Right.
Okay. So for the next minute, it was teacher talk, and you were asking questions. Teacher asked students to stop copying the text, and you asked them to answer the 2 questions on their paper. So again, they were just answering questions and not talking. And then the next minute from there, you restated one of your questions, more specifically asking if there was technology, if it would have made it faster for them to copy the book.
Right.
At which point I think a few light bulbs lit up,
yes,
and I saw hands go up, and then you actually took some answers from a couple of students. Okay, so we had some engagement or interaction there from the students.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the next 2 minutes, you actually asked 4 more questions, which I didn't write down the actual questions, but I kept like a little tally, and you got very quick, random, short responses. You know, I'm not sure if that's something that is typical, or if it was just that particular lesson that day. Could you see yourself having given them an opportunity to do more talking with those questions before responding, or any other way of doing that?
After thinking about it, yes, but I mean, if I'm just planning a lesson, I'm more the quick, rapid, move on, cover the material, next question.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, you know, there was student talk, but it was, again, very quick, short responses. So I'm not sure if that's what the expectation is. And then for the last 15 minutes that I was in there, because I was in there for 40 minutes, so I tracked the time. The last 15 minutes, you began a lecture, which was a PowerPoint on Northern Renaissance. Students were copying notes. You asked a total of 7 more questions during the lecture. I caught about 4 of them that I actually wrote down. And students were, you know, calling out answers. There were a few that raised their hands, and most of it was you talking, them copying, and then answering some of your questions there in between.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is the data that I collected.
Okay.
And again, the point was to see if there's more teacher talk than student talk, if it's balanced. You know, where do we want to go with this? How would we have done maybe this lesson differently if we wanted the kids to be more hands-on, to deepen and practice the information?
Okay.
So now seeing the data, how do you feel like the lesson went?
So, I mean, seeing the data, I still think that the lesson went really well, but with the questions that you brought up over here about the what did you think while doing this activity, maybe instead of me asking them and calling on them, they could have talked in their groups about the questions and told each other how they felt, and maybe commiserated that they had to copy the textbook. And then maybe instead of me having to come up with this next question of, you know, why about technology, because I specifically went to technology because they kept writing like summarization and paraphrasing. So maybe instead of me having to come up with this third question, as a group they could have talked through it and said, well, maybe a printer would have helped this go a little bit better. So thinking about it now, I definitely could have put them in groups to where they spoke about the material before I went over it myself. But I like to talk.
As we do as history teachers, right? So then you do see though that there was a lot more teacher talk than student talk.
Oh, absolutely.
And that was your concern.
Yes.
So this data kind of shows us that. And you've pretty much just said that maybe by restructuring the lesson to allow more talk amongst the groups, it would allow them to build more on the information before you kind of giving it to them.
Right.
Okay. Well, I mean, do you have any questions about any of the data or any of the things that we went over?
No.
Okay. So I think that our next step would be to keep our focus in mind, and that is to organize the students to practice and deepen knowledge, to sort of keep in mind what we went through during this lesson, and seeing how you can tweak a lesson just a little bit to make it more engaging for the kids and allow for more student talk. And maybe we can revisit this class with another lesson and see how we can incorporate that.
Absolutely.
All right, awesome.
Thank
you.